And we're going to be investigating environmental ethics by looking at the philosophy of Aldo Leopold, who was a central figure in the American environmentalism movement in the 20th century. So Aldo Leopold was a scientist. He was a forester. He was, as I said before, an environmentalist. And he ended up developing what you might regard as a distinct ethical theory regarding appropriate treatment of the land. And as we'll see by the term land, he doesn't just mean, stuff that we're standing on. He means everything that is involved kind of in the biotic systems of which we are a part. So the soil, the water, the trees, the insects, the other mammals, the birds, everything that is involved in these ecosystems and these biotic systems that we're a part of, he would like to see us to change our behavior towards those things and to change our conceptualization of those things and how all those things are connected and make our lives possible. Leopold came to have a deep respect for the land, for the environment, after a very eye-opening experience that he had as a forester. I believe he recalls this earlier in the book, part of the book that I had you read for today, A Sant County Almanac. And he basically retells this experience in which he and a few other foresters were trying to make the land that they were managing better for hunters for the upcoming hunting season. And they saw, as they were camping, as they were sitting around a fire, a wolf mother and her wolf pups crossing over a riverbank. And so, because they know that wolves hunt deer, they thought it would be a good idea to get rid of this wolf and her pups. Eventually, when they got down there, they ended up having an interaction with this wolf, and they did end up shooting it and killing it, and they thought that they were doing something good by this. I believe earlier in the book he says that he was helping to establish what would be a hunter's paradise for this upcoming season. But he says that as the wolf was dying on the ground, he saw the green fire in her eyes go out. And he had the startling realization that what he had just done is not something that was good for this biotic community of which the wolf was a part. He was imposing a human desire or a human will on this environment, trying to make it, again, a hunter's paradise rather than respecting the delicate balance of the ecosystem. And it was this kind of experience that sparked his environmental work that would later contribute to the environmental movement that we see in the United States and in the West generally today. Now, Leopold's basic philosophy echoes a sentiment that we've already looked at in this class, that we've already looked at within the ethics of care. Leopold notes at the outset of this piece that every ethical system that we have is based on the premise that the individual is a member of a community of interdependent parts. This is something that Held and Nell Noddings talked about, right, in the ethics of care. The idea that we wouldn't be where we are today without all of these other pieces and relationships around us that make our existences possible and actual. Leopold echoes that idea here, but he's coming at it from another angle. He's going to end up applying this idea to how we ought to treat the environment and developing a kind of ethic of treating the land appropriately. It is not the case that we are all separate, autonomous individuals, disconnected from one another, that our actions don't have impacts on the environment around us, that they don't have impacts on the people around us. Rather, we exist in a system, you might say in systems, plural, of interdependent parts, where anything in that system does has an impact on the rest of that system. Leopold thinks that this is a great way to understand the environment and humans' proper place in the environment. And so it is this core idea that he's going to base his land ethic around. He wants to make it clear to us that we have not been respecting the land as we should. We have not been respecting the land and its inhabitants. We have rather been abusing it for our own economic gain. What kind of things do you think he has in mind of ways that we are treating our environment, our planet, inappropriately? That is not respectful. It does not involve respecting the land or respecting its inhabitants. What kinds of consequences are our actions having on the environment? We all just go out and we pet the lilies and the daisies and we whisper sweet nothings into their leaves, right? We never kill any animals.
Overconsumption of water and different natural resources to the point that it doesn't exist anymore.
Right. Overconsumption, right, of a lot of different kinds of natural resources. Great. One example of that might be timber, lumber, right? Clearing down a lot of forests for the fast furniture that we use, that IKEA sells, for example. Clearing land for our cattle so that they can graze, right? How many acres of land are being destroyed every second in the Amazon, making way for cattle? It's not an insignificant amount. So we have overconsumption of natural resources, resources on which our very lives depend, right? We're destroying a lot of ecosystems to make way for our, meat production and consumption habits, right? Not to mention the horrible lives that a lot of those factory farmed animals lead, which we've already talked about. What's happening to our water in a lot of places? What's happening to our oceans?
They're becoming so polluted that you can't use them for anything.
Say that again?
They're becoming so polluted that they can't be used for anything at all.
What are they being polluted with?
Inorganic waste from humans.
Inorganic waste from humans. There's a bunch of microplastics that are in the ocean now. You've heard of the 100-mile island, which is just a big giant trash heap in the ocean. I was reading an article the other day which was trying to argue that rainwater is no longer fit for public consumption because it contains chemicals, artificial chemicals that are correlated with cancer. And so we can't even drink our own rainwater anymore, even, I guess, because our artificial chemicals have extended that far on the globe. I hope that's not true, but And what are happening to the animals in these environments? Cutting down a lot of forests for wood, so we can probably make stuff we don't need. Poisoning water supplies with artificial chemicals, runoff. A lot of trash is ending up in the ocean. What's happening to the animals in these ecosystems?
They either die off entirely or have to be forced to live somewhere else.
Right. A lot of things are dying, right? That doesn't mean that a lot of species are becoming extinct, but we might worry about that possibility if we continue down this kind of use of the land. And so Leopold wants to make it clear to us, and he was writing this, in the early 1900s. Back then, things are not as bad as they are now, but he wants to make it clear to us that we have not been respecting the land, and this is based on a misconception of our role in nature and our role in the environment and as parts of these overarching biotic systems from which we cannot escape. So let's talk about that. Leopold has an interesting, holistic view of what it means to engage in ethical action, and this is based on a certain theory of biology that he has. To get to his ethics, we have to talk about the nature of the environment and human life within it. It's not the case that we exist in a vacuum. Rather, humans are only one part of the large, interconnected, what he calls biotic pyramid, or what you might call biotic energy pyramid. And he offers us the following picture. He asks us to conceptualize our environment as one giant pyramid. Basically, the way that ecosystems work and the overarching net ecosystem that we're a part of as humans on this planet forms a pyramid, you could say, in which energy flows from the bottom to the top. Humans are kind of at the top of the pyramid. We're at the top of the food chain. And we rely on the constituent elements of the pyramid underneath us for our life. And we exhibit a kind of mastery over those parts that are below us. But he provides kind of a biological analysis to show us that our actions have really far-ranging consequences. And we need to conceptualize ourselves as a part of a larger interconnected system rather than seeing ourselves as separate from nature and separate from the organisms in the natural environment around us. Here's the basic analysis he provides. Soil contains nutrients, which provides energy for plants. Plants absorb energy from the sun, and they utilize the soil in which they grow in order to grow themselves. energy continues flowing up the pyramid through the process of insects and other rodents and other smaller organisms that feed on the plants and make the plant energy their own, continuing their own life. You can see where this is going. Larger organisms feed on these smaller organisms that get their energy primarily from plants and other natural aspects of the environment. And so we see the energy continuing to flow up the pyramid. Until eventually, energy gets transferred to the top of the pyramid through these natural processes, through food chains, for example. And up here near the top of the pyramid, we have the largest predators, the largest organisms, as well as humans. Now this picture helps us see, Leopold thinks, that each layer depends critically on the layers beneath it. If the land and the soil get messed up, if the water gets poisoned, what happens to the insects and the plants that depend on this bottom layer? Bad stuff, right? If the land can no longer provide nutrients for plants, plants can't grow. If plants can't grow, you can't have insects and rodents feeding on these things. Insects and rodents are going to die. If the insects and rodents die, then the organisms that rely on the natural processes that those organisms engage in are also going to die, right? And what ends up happening is it's not only the case that the layers above depend critically on the layers beneath them, but due to the natural cycles that we have on our planet, like the water cycle and other natural processes like these, energy gets transferred back into the bottom. So you can think of this pyramid as not only laying out the relationships that we have with the other organisms on our planet, but also the movement of the energy that makes our life possible, because it makes the life of all these other organisms and things possible, on which we critically depend. So each layer depends critically on the layers beneath it. The relationships of the different entities in the pyramid can be represented by food chains, which you've talked about in your biology classes, right? Probably in high school, where each species is often a link in many different chains. An example of a food chain that you might use to describe the relationship of different natural things or organisms with other entities in the pyramid might be something like soil, corn, cow, farmer. Where the soil, the proper soil, allows the corn to grow. Corn is used to feed the cow. Cow is used to feed the human. And there are so many different kinds of food chains that we can construct that detail the different relationships between the entities in the biotic pyramid. But this flow of energy and the relationships that are made apparent by this kind of picture are supposed to describe what makes life possible on our Earth, on our planet, and how that happens. What Leopold is looking to do with this picture is not just to provide us with a biological analysis, but to widen the scope of moral consideration. This is something that Peter Singer was also trying to do, right? Peter Singer thought that it's not just humans that we need to consider when in our decision-making practices. We also need to consider animals, because animals have the capacity to suffer. Well, Leopold is kind of taking that strategy and he's extending it out further beyond even animals. What he's trying to do is to get us to consider not only animals and other humans in our moral decision-making processes, but also all of the things on which our lives and animal life depend. Because all of these things are interconnected. And as soon as one thing goes, the other things are going to go too. So he's trying to expand the moral domain to include things in it like soil and water and plants. By the term land, he means to denote all of those things that are necessary basically for the survival of this biotic pyramid. So by land, he means soil, water, plants, humans, basically everything that makes up the constituent parts of life on Earth as we know it. Every element of the system. So not only is Leopold here trying to get us to care about animals, he's trying to get us to care about the soil that we rely on, our water sources, other natural environments, maybe rocks to some extent. Rocks have some role to play, but probably not too much. And so by land, what he means to denote is the collection of every element in the biotic pyramid. And what he's trying to convince us of, again, is that even plants, soil, and water are deserving of our moral consideration. Because animals and humans depend on these things for their lives and their survival. And the reason that we should care about these things and figure these, you might even say, non-living things, right, soil and water, into our moral decision-making process is because whenever a change occurs in the biotic pyramid, which is going to alter the flow of energy in the pyramid, every part of the pyramid has to adjust to that change. So when there's a change in the water supply, that's going to affect the plants that can grow in that region. The plants that grow in that region are going to affect the insects and the rodents and the other things that feed on the plants, right? Which then are going to have impacts further up the pyramid as well. So we need to become more sensitive to how our actions are affecting even the non-living things in our life, like soil and water. Because human life and animal life depends critically on these elements. Now, nature already kind of has its own internal checks and balances on things going wrong in the flow of energy within the biotic pyramid. Right? Imagine a scenario, an ecosystem in which you have a forest where there's a population of deer and a population of wolves. Let's say a few wolves die out because of some disease. What's going to happen to the deer population the next year? It's going to increase, right? There are less wolves around to hunt the deer, so the deer population is going to increase. What's going to happen to the wolf population following the increase in the population of deer? What do you think is going to happen? The deer population increases, so what does the wolf population do in response to that? Anybody have a guess?
Also increase.
It's going to increase, right? Why is it going to increase?
Because there's more food.
There's more food, exactly. So the wolf population is going to increase. Now that the wolf population has increased, what's going to happen to the deer population? It's going to go down, right? Because there are more wolves hunting the deer. And here we have a predator-prey cycle, right? Where a fluctuation in the change of the population of the predator or prey is going to affect the other one. But there's a certain kind of equilibrium that's established, right? A kind of back and forth in which if the population increases in one, the population is going to increase in the other, which is going to bring it back down to equilibrium range. There are a lot of kind of internal checks and balances that nature has within its ecosystem, within its various ecosystems. But the problem is that ecosystems are not impenetrable, right? We can have a drastic effect on the ecosystems around us, and human intervention into these ecosystems is messing a lot of them up. When we cut down too many trees, when we poison too many water supplies, when we drive too many animals from their habitats, these ecosystems are affected in ways that are going to end up affecting us down the line as well. And so not being appropriately cognizant of the consequences that our actions are having on things like the soil and the water and the plants is going to end up biting us in the butt. And it's not good for these organisms either to go through those kinds of changes. Humans have instituted many complex changes in the biotic pyramid, which has compromised it in a lot of ways around the globe and has introduced invasive species into habitats in which they don't belong. So says Aldo Leopold. Human activity has ended up affecting the biotic pyramid in ways that we were not cognizant of before, and in ways that we are probably not entirely aware of now. And this is not good for these ecosystems themselves, and it's not going to end up being good for humans either, because we depend on natural resources on this planet for our very survival and for all the stuff that we're trying to do every day in our human activities. Right? We depend on natural resources to drive our cars. We depend on natural resources to light our homes. We depend on natural resources for our food. Unless we somehow figure out a way to do all of this stuff artificially, we're always going to be tied to the land in this way. And so whenever there is a change in the environment, when there's a change in the climate, humans are going to be affected by that as well. And this is something that we as a species haven't been thinking enough about, Leopold thinks. Exploitative industrial and agricultural practices have endangered the land and us by extension. While maybe some small effects on the land, on the soil, and on our water supplies we're going to be insulated from, we are not just having small impacts on the environment around us. We are engaging in industrial practices, agricultural practices that overmine, that overcultivate resources in our environment, that upset natural habitats, that introduce invasive species, and that are necessarily, at some point, going to affect us, even if it's not in the immediate future. And so, after going through this kind of biological analysis in which Leopold tries to convince us that really we're only one small part of this large, interconnected, biotic energy pyramid, such that we're connected with every other living thing on this earth in some sense, he tries to outline kind of a new ethic, a new way of conceptualizing and treating the land. Bless you. A land ethic which actually involves understanding the kinds of impacts that we can have on the environment and involves changing how we conceptualize the environment and therefore the kinds of actions that we ought to take towards the environment and how we ought to treat it. For one, Leopold is going to call people to respect the land a lot more than they are now. What this respect involves is not only reconceptualizing what the land is, but it also involves changing our behavior towards the land. Ideally, what you'd like to see is for us to love, respect, and to admire the land, which is something that we haven't been doing. Leopold notes that our advancements in technology, our advancements within civilization have alienated us from the land, have alienated us in some sense from the natural environment, and that if we want to turn our environmental practices around, if we want to create a world in which we want to live and we want future generations to live in, we need to reconnect ourselves to the land. This means perhaps spending more time in nature, spending more time thinking about nature, spending more time thinking about maybe our consumption practices and the kinds of effects that that's having on the environment around us. We need to reconnect to nature both physically and psychologically. We're not going to reconnect to nature physically if we don't do it psychologically first, if we don't think about it, if we don't reconceptualize the land, form an intention to actually go out and spend time on the land. But then he also thinks that spending time physically in nature is also going to be good for us. It's going to have health benefits. It's going to have mental health benefits, perhaps. A lot of our harmful industrial and agricultural practices, or anti-environmental practices, are because modern civilization alienates us from the environment, from nature, from the land. And we need to fix that. In addition, we need to dispel this view that we are either a slave to Mother Nature or nature's master. This is not the proper understanding to have of our relationship to the land. We are not a slave to nature, nor are we its master that can do whatever we want to do to it. Rather, we should view ourselves rather as a participant in this large interconnected natural system of which we are a part on this planet. We are one participant among many. And so changing our practices that are harming the environment is going to involve changing how we conceptualize what the environment is, changing how we understand what our relationship is to the environment, and changing how it is that we view ourselves regarding the environment. Not its slave, not its master, rather a participant in this system of which we did not create, but we can destroy if we're not careful, because we have that power, we have that capability. And the destruction of the environment is inevitably going to lead to our destruction as a species. To do this, he ends this piece by providing some useful advice on how to change our relationship to the land, how we can go about instilling these things, internalizing these views. Well, how do you change future generations' minds about anything? What needs to be a part of that? What are you engaging in right now by just sitting and listening to me go on about this stuff? What's the E word that you go to college for? Education, that's right. Thank you. We need to change the way that we educate people about the land. We need to change our educational policy. We can increase education about the environment and humans' place in it. We can alter the nature of it so that future generations will have a different relationship to the land than a lot of people do today. Obviously, we can't just increase education. We also have to change the nature of our education, right? It's not going to do anybody any good just to tack on another 4 years of schooling to all of you, right? We also have to change the nature of our education, modifying the content, adding in an ethics of land use and respect. That's terrible. I don't know what I'm doing. And finally, there's another thing that we need to do, another broad thing. And this includes changing how we treat the land, right? Which is going to involve a certain change in our industrial, our agricultural, and our other socioeconomic practices. We need to dispel our economically self-interested practices and our economic view of the environment. We need to stop looking at the environment as something that can and should be exploited by us to serve our own ends. Rather, we need to place that economic self-interested view, again with a view as we are a participant in this system, not somebody who's supposed to wrest control of it according to our own wills. Life ain't all about what humans want. I mean, that's a big part of it. But oftentimes we have let our own desires and our own self-interested goals actually get in the way of our long-term health because we've allowed our practices to affect the health of the environment on which we depend. So this is a brief overview of Aldo Leopold's land ethic. He wants to expand the domain of considerations when we're trying to engage ethically in the world to include not only animals, but also non-living things like land, soil, water, plants as well, although those are living. Because if we don't end up changing our view of the land, if we don't end up changing our relationship with it, not only are we going to end up wiping out a whole bunch of species, we're going to end up killing ourselves too. That is, if we can't figure out how to get off this giant space rock first and colonize another planet. So what do you all think of this view? Do you like Leopold's project? Think he's got a cool little biological view here? What do you feel about this? What do you feel about our environmental practices currently? Oh, yeah.
He wrote this, in 1949, right?
I thought it was earlier than that. But maybe it wasn't published until posthumously. I'm not sure.
It just says that date under his title.
Yeah, I think he wrote it before that. But yeah, he was writing it, before the kind of environmental movements that we have today, which is really interesting, right?
I think he's ahead of his time. I think he'd be really sad to see where we are today.
Why would he be sad?
Because this place sucks.
Can you say more about that?
We kill everything all the time and don't even think about it.
We haven't really been following his philosophy, huh? Companies have gotten bigger. Environmental practices. Some things have changed, which has been good, but maybe not as much as a lot of people would like. Huh? Are things really that bad, though? What do you think? Look, microplastics are only going to affect you, near the end of your life after you've been ingesting them for a really long time, right? Cancer. We're looking to develop a cure for that right now. There's some estimates that we'll have a cure to cancer within 20 years. Do we really need to worry about our environmental practice so much? Animals can be scary. They can kill us. I don't know. I don't have a particular love for a lot of different kinds of species. Do you? Maybe we should care more about different species? I know you all have opinions about this. Yeah.
Well, when we're talking about this, I think a lot about the bees and how that's become a really prevalent problem that people are just killing beehives when they see them because they're a nuisance and sting you and whatever. But Albert Einstein famously said that once the bees are dead, we're dead because there's nothing to pollinate any of the plants that we eat and there's nothing to move all that around. So I think people don't realize how important it is to keep keep other animals alive on top of us because they contribute to how we stay alive.
Right. What other creatures are we intimately dependent on? Does anybody know? Bees are a pretty good example. I mean, we eat a lot of cows, but we don't eat all those cows, right? Plankton. Plankton are critically important. I'm surprised the cult of plankton hasn't grown up already after watching these nature documentaries on what plankton do. They're incredible. We would all be dead if it was not for plankton. But look, there's still lots of bees to go around, right? Lots of plankton in the oceans. Do we really need to be that worried? The earth is pretty durable, right? We've been abusing it for a long time, right? It hasn't died on us yet. I know y'all are sitting there smiling on the inside because you're like, that is so wrong. Tell me why it's wrong, or tell me why you think it's wrong. Why should we care about our planet at all? Look, we're getting pretty good at space travel, right? Why don't we just treat this planet like shit, and then we'll just hop to a different one? Why don't we take that route? Yeah.
All the rich people are going to leave us here.
Or maybe it'll be like a Wall-E situation, right? Where a lot of people are taken up, and then we get to live on our nice space lives with our entertainment.
So nice.
It sounds like you said that with a little bit of sarcasm. Or cynicism, maybe, right? That's not a desirable life. You want to live in space orbiting a dying planet? But yeah, that's a worry, right? Maybe space travel is only going to become available to rich people at the beginning. And then the rich people take all their money and all their resources and they leave us behind. And then how do we fix the problem? I don't know. Do y'all think here that there are ways that we could be improving our environmental practices, our agricultural practices, our industrial practices? Yes or no? Yeah? What kinds of things should we change, if anything at all? What are we doing wrong?
Relying too heavily on non-renewable resources instead of looking at renewable resources for forms of energy and consumption.
Okay, so what would be examples of renewable resources?
Hydroelectric power, wind power, solar power, like coming away from like fossil fuel reliance and going more towards something that's not as destructive with its output.
Okay. What about nuclear power? Would that be a good replacement?
In some cases, yes.
If it can be done safely, perhaps?
Safely, it's one of the better options we have.
Okay. I like those recommendations. Hydroelectric power sounds good. Nuclear power could be good. But do you all buy his overall claim that we should care about the land and the water and the soil? Or do you think he's like, you're like, he's kind of right about that, but he's kind of going a little overboard. What is he, a tree hugger? Probably did hug trees. How in danger are we of destroying our planet with our current practices? Is it as bad as climate scientists say? Is it worse? Maybe a better question to ask is, shelving that, will adopting an ethic like this affect our personal lives all that much? I doubt any of us are all that aware of the myriad consequences our consumption practices have on the environment, for example. Perhaps we're kind of generally aware. We're like, I bought this thing from Aldi. It comes in a plastic thing. It doesn't look like this plastic is recyclable. That's not good, but it's just one bit of plastic, right? Would adopting an ethic like this affect our lives that much? Would it really place a large cost on us? What do you think? Maybe none of you know. I don't know. Let's assume for a moment that Leopold is at least partly correct here. That there are practices that we are engaging in as a society that are not having good consequences on the environment and therefore are not going to have good consequences on us in the long term. Whose responsibility is to fix that?
I feel like for it to actually work, it would have to be mandated. Like for people to actually listen and give a shit about it, it would have to be mandated by the government in some sort of way.
There would have to be like legal policy drafted.
Yeah, because not everybody cares, like, about, like, what's going on with all this and stuff like that, or just don't know at all, so.
Probably true, yeah. Who could make the biggest impact though in changing what we're currently doing to the environment?
I don't think that if all of us in this room decided that we were gonna live as eco-friendly as possible for the rest of our lives, I don't think that would change anything unless the giant corporations do something other than kill and waste money.
Okay, so you're saying it's like larger corporations that are on the hook really for a lot of the damage that we're doing to the environment. Does anybody else think that's true? I talk about meat consumption with my students sometimes, and we talked about it in this class too. And I don't know if I said it then, but one of the things that I like to trot out when talking about the ethics of eating meat, and factory farming and all that, is if you decided to stop eating meat, would you have any impact on meat production and consumption? You wouldn't, right? One person foregoing meat for the rest of their lives is not going to affect the meat industry at all. And while I think a lot of change can be made from kind of grassroots movements, you know, from the bottom up, with a lot of people changing their production and mostly consumption practices, maybe what we should be doing if we want to change how we're treating the environment is holding some of these corporations to account in some way. How could we do that, if at all? Yeah.
I have been seeing recently, I don't know if anybody else has seen this, like the protesters that like I feel like there's a way to like make awareness about it. Like I don't know if anybody has seen the protesters like throwing cans of soup on like priceless pieces of art and like and whatever, and it's supposed to represent something about climate change, and they have them like fixed and like back up on the wall in like 30 minutes or something. I saw like they have like films over it or whatever, like they're like bringing awareness to it, not in that kind of a way. I feel like that's kind of a stupid way to bring awareness to climate change, but I feel like if you were to like make people more aware of it, it could like help with like the bigger corporations like changing their ways or something like that.
Right. My sense of those kind of incidents is that they're doing this for the shock value, right? They're trying to get people's attention on this environmental issue. Now we'll see if that actually works in furthering the environmental cause. I think a lot of people are going to look at them like jackasses.
They like super glue their hands to like cars and crap. Like what is? I just don't understand. I've seen a lot about it recently. I don't understand what they're trying to get across.
So we can draw attention to the issue. I'm not sure if that's the best way to do it, because I think a lot of people hold art as sacred in some sense, and they're not going to look on the destruction of art happily and with much support, even if it's for a good cause. Maybe you disagree though. What else could we do if we're trying to change how we as a society are impacting the environment? Bringing awareness to the situation, sure. Easier to do now than ever, now that we're all connected on social media, right? We all have some sort of voice that could reach a lot of people, potentially. What else could we do? Yeah. Hey.
Vote.
Vote. Okay. How could that help?
I mean, just vote for people who you think will represent or like have a good grasp on just climate change issues.
Okay.
Or represent your beliefs.
So people who are going to bring attention to the issue and hopefully draft legislation that could fix some of these destructive practices. Sure. Anything else? I mean, we could always try to be eco-friendly ourselves, right? But that It's not going to have so much of an impact, but maybe it's the principle that matters, right, more than the impact. Maybe some of you in here are vegetarian on principle, right? Your vegetarianism is not going to have a significant impact on the meat industry, but on principle, right? How about voting with your wallet? Heard that phrase, right? What if we just stopped purchasing products from companies that engage in environmentally destructive practices? Capitalism is very good at following the money, right? And companies are sensitive to changes in consumption and what the people want because they're always trying to sell us stuff, right? So what if we didn't buy stuff from Nestle, from Amazon, from some of these large companies who are not engaging in eco-friendly practices? Could that work? Maybe that also would be more of a thing based on principle. I'm not sure any one of us would really have that large of an impact, based on our own personal consumption habits, right? Even if all of us in this room decided to do that. Well, maybe it has a small part to play, like maybe not eating meat. I hesitate to encourage people to call others out, but I find it kind of hypocritical that a lot of our famous celebrities are advocating for environmental causes and they're still flying around on their private jets. That seems to me a little bit nonsensical. I don't know, what do you think about that? Private jets, private yachts, whatever it is. Is there anybody here who doesn't think this is really an issue, though? Are we making a mountain out of a molehill? Maybe our planet has a lot of time left before it gets to a point where it becomes uninhabitable.
Not that I personally think this, but I have heard people say that, like, by the time this earth is gone, like, we're gonna be dead. Like, it's not really gonna affect us, which sounds super selfish, but, like, when you think about it, like, depending on whenever I die, like, I feel like the earth's still gonna be here, we're still gonna be living, like, it'll probably be gone before, like, after I'm dead.
So are they saying, like, look, I don't really think about environmental causes because I'll be dead before it impacts me, or like we as a species will be dead before it impacts us?
I know, like, personally, I think.
Okay. Maybe you think we as a species might be dead too. Maybe we're going to just blow ourselves up before we ever have to worry about it. Could be. I don't know. But maybe, maybe this is all well and good, but maybe we don't need to have the sense of urgency that a lot of people have. Anybody think that? Like, look, we got some time left. The carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is only like 0.008% of the total air or whatever. Don't quote me on that statistic. That's just an example. I don't know, do we need to have the kind of urgency that Leopold is calling for in this piece? A drastic change in our relationship to the land and how we see it? Do we have time? Bless you. Here's an interesting little fact. There have been groups of economists and experts that have analyzed trends that make societies more eco-friendly. And what's interesting is actually that increased industrialization ends up making a society more eco-friendly in the long term. Should we try to industrialize the entire world? Every country in Africa, every country in Asia. Industrialization is going to produce money. Money allows us to put stuff towards environmental causes, like planting trees, like developing bacteria that can eat plastics. I don't know. It's kind of a paradox there, right? I'm not sure exactly how much of an issue this is, but I don't want to find out. Maybe that's the correct attitude to take. But it seems that we as individuals are not going to be able to have a big impact on changing a practice like this. Because so much of the damage that is being done by these larger companies, by these larger organizations. Nevertheless, there do seem to be things that we can do if we do think this is a problem, right? We can talk about it on social media. We could change our own personal habits. We can not buy products from companies that don't engage in eco-friendly practices. Maybe you yourself could actually have an impact if you think this is a problem. If there are any chemistry or biology or physics majors in here, maybe you could do research on eco-friendly technology or strategies that the human race might utilize to kind of mitigate the impact that we're currently having. In any case, I think this is an interesting issue to discuss, not only because it's very prevalent in our conversations in the public sphere, but also because of the idea that Leopold gives us here, which involves, again, expanding the domain of what should be considered in our moral decision making to include not just organisms, not just things that can suffer, like Peter Singer said, but also soil, water, rocks, trees. It's an interesting moral view, right? Because it involves you totally reconceptualizing what we might consider as moral agents. Agents is not the right word because agents do things, but things that are worthy of moral consideration during our lives. I think his biological analysis is pretty interesting. And it prompts us to ask very important questions about what it is that we should really be reflecting on when we try to engage ethically with others and in society during our lives. Does anybody have any questions or concerns about this? Feel like you get his view pretty well? All right. Well, I'll let you all go then. I will see you on Thursday. I believe we have a discussion day, right? All right, so come with any questions you have about this unit specifically. We'll go over those first, and then we'll talk about some general questions after that.